Dark omens, loose hellhounds, or a spate of runaway Labradors? I'm Matt and this is the Spectred Isle. Welcome to the Spectred Isle, a channel dedicated to the myths, mysteries and malcontents that inhabit these great isles of Britain. Today we're looking at the incredibly prevalent sightings of beastly black dogs. Present throughout our folklore and mythology, they are usually described as quite large, somewhere between the size of a normal dog and a human being. They have black fur that's often seen as quite rough and shaggy, and typically they have glowing red or yellow eyes. Generally they are associated with bad omens or impending death, or as servants or even the manifestations of the devil himself. The origin of this is unknown, though there are prevailing theories, the most typical being that older European mythology seems to feature black dogs in hell-adjacent positions, such as Cerberus guarding the gates of the underworld, and that as people spread out and across Europe and into Britain, such as the Celts and the Romans, their culture and mythology came with it, and this was something that just lodged itself into folklore. Just like Rickrolling has been endured for over 2 decades at this point, what we're looking at is just centuries of black dog rolling. There are a few examples in Scotland and Wales, but it seems to be a very English thing, and some of the more popular claims of sightings can be found here. Yeah, that's a hell of a lot of sightings. What's interesting is that while reports of black dogs allegedly happen in almost every single English county, you can quite clearly see where there are 3 areas they seem to be specifically clustered: West Yorkshire, Central Cornwall and Hertfordshire. Possibly the dogs sighted in these clusters are all the same one that just likes to hang out in different places and goes by several different names, or maybe these 3 areas are the absolute peak of devil worship or crossroads demon deals. Topographically speaking, 2 of these areas are quite hilly and contain a decent chunk of moorland, especially up north, which coincides with the assertion that these beasts are found on the moors. Also weird is that Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man all seem to have at least 1 black dog sighting, but the Isle of Wight I couldn't find anything specific, so if you are scared of black dogs, go there. Naturally, despite the length some of my videos end up reaching, we are not going to talk about every single one of them, just some of the more well-known or interesting examples. Also, just to note, this is not an official map, I just pulled it together from the sightings that I collected from a few various different sources, so the exact locations might not be that accurate. For example, I already know I chose the wrong Milnthorpe, and there were a lot clustered around areas like West Yorkshire where, in hindsight, I could have just done one big dot, but it is what it is. Black dog is a bit of a boring name to give a mythological creature, and presumably confusing to people who actually own a black dog, but there are plenty of other names given to them depending on the region. And there are lots to choose from. In his book Mystery Animals of Britain and Ireland, which has a whole section dedicated to black dogs, Gray McEwen lists plenty of regional variations, including Barguest, Black Shuck, Capelthwaite, Church Grim, Galley Trot, Girt Dog, Hairy Jack, Hellhound, Hooter, Moddy Doo, Old Scarp, Old Shock, Padfoot, Scarf, Shagfall, Shucky Dog, Shug Monster, Skeff, Skriker, Striker, and Trash. McEwen also explores the possible meanings behind these names. Generally they're taken from Old English, Norse, Old German words, either for the locations that they haunt, through to the sounds that they make or even the actions that they perform. And even then there are disagreements between experts. For example, Barguest could be from the word bar being used as a gate in northern England, and gast meaning spirit, so literally gate ghost. Or it can come from Bergengast, meaning town ghost, or the German Berg and Geist, meaning hill ghost. So 3 potential haunting locations just from disagreements over where the name comes from. The legends also differ in their telling of what forms the dogs take. Sometimes they just appear and look at you, whereas others follow you around. Some are silent, some bark and howl, some make chain noises like typical Dickensian ghosts. Some legends don't specify a place that they haunt beyond the moors, some place them at a crossroads which links them to the demonic bargain folklore, others place them at prisons or sites of executions. In other tales they're not even sinister but act as protectors of travellers and lead the lost back onto the trail. Black dog legends have also lent inspiration to several literary works and figures. Dracula in Bram Stoker's novel ascends the steps of the church as a black dog. The Brontes mention black dogs a bit, such as in Charlotte's Jane Eyre. The aptly named Grim and Sirius Black's animal appearance in the Harry Potter series, and of course Sherlock Holmes' adventure in Arthur Conan Doyle's Hound of the Baskervilles. Before we continue on, McEwan did produce his own map of sightings, but it also featured big cats, sea serpents and lake monsters, so I made my own because as much as we love Nessie, it's not always about you. Interestingly, if the Isle of Wight isn't your thing, so long as you avoid Anglesey, apparently you could always move to North Wales. So let's get stuck into the actual stories. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to just list every sighting because there's tons of them. I'm only going to go for the more well-known or detailed accounts. But it's worth starting off with the earliest known English description of spectral black dogs, which can be found in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle when describing an event occurring in 1127. A very brief aside to discuss the Chronicle, it is the collective name given to several written accounts of Saxon history of England. It started during the reign of Alfred the Great and is the best and in some cases only recorded history of England during that time period. Several versions were produced, namely by monasteries that wrote their own versions and sometimes lent it to other monasteries after events that destroyed their versions. The sighting we're about to discuss comes from the Peterborough Chronicle, named so as it was maintained by the abbots of Peterborough Monastery, and is one of the few surviving records of the decades following the Norman conquest of England. The passage is only brief, but it mentions an event where several people witnessed a large hunting party containing monstrous men, horses, goats and dogs, all of them black and huge, and the dogs were described as black and broad-eyed and loathly. Most things were described as loathly in that passage, to be fair, but the dogs were as well. I mean, that's all there is, but I felt it worth putting in as the official first ever recording of beastly black dogs that we know about. Next on the list is the Barguest. Now this is the name of a black dog spirit said to roam around Yorkshire and the north of England, with the legend believing that the dog is an omen of impending death, and even leads a procession of local dogs if someone of prominence is due to die. This is alluded to in William Henderson's Notes on the Folklore of the Northern Counties of England and the Borders, a book I don't own because it's probably too big to fit on the bookshelf with a title like that. But in it, his Yorkshire informant beheld the procession before the death of a man named Squire Wade. The Barguest is also the subject of a ballad called The Legend of the Troller's Gill, a gorge in the Yorkshire Dales where the subject of the ballad attempts to raise the creature using a magic ritual only to be mauled to death. So that's a nice bedtime story to tell the kids, isn't it? Perhaps the most famous is the Whitby Barguest. So Reverend Donald Omand, a Church of England exorcist from Dorset, claims that as a child he visited Kettleness during a holiday in Whitby and felt as though he were repelled by the place. He later read Bram Stoker's Dracula and was amazed that the vampire, as a black dog, arrives at the shore there. Working as a reporter in his youth, Omand spoke to a local fisherman who claimed several times to have seen a great black dog appear on the bay before disappearing, and claimed to have never heard of or read Dracula, or in fact heard of people walking their dogs on the beach every morning. Later, in the 1950s, while working as an exorcist, he was contacted by a schoolmaster who had visited Whitby with some friends, and while they were looking at the shore at Kettleness, witnessed the black dog and felt an overwhelming sense of evil. Omand travelled there upon request to use his powers to cleanse the shore of said evil. He claims to have felt the same aroma of corruption, and the black dog appeared again. He states, "We saw what looked like a huge black hound, but bigger than any member of the canine species known to man. It was moving straight in our direction, and the schoolmaster's nerve gave way completely. He rushed back to the car. But I had a job to do, and the sooner it was accomplished the better. I knew that the terrifying spectacle moving towards me had no substance whatever. It was a mere projection, a manifestation of an evil with which I had already contended on hundreds of occasions. Uncorking the bottle which I was carrying, I commanded the spectre as follows: "Be gone in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Be gone to the place appointed for you, there to remain forever. Be gone in the name of Christ." As I spoke the last words, I splashed holy water in the direction of the apparition, and the latter disappeared as suddenly as it materialised. Then I exorcised all the ground which the spectre had covered, and a great heaviness went out of the atmosphere. The menace of Kettleness was ended. The corruption had departed. Apparently Bram Stoker was quite familiar with that coast, and Omand believes he too witnessed the apparition and was inspired to write the scene in Dracula as a result. The next major legend I want to mention is the Whisthound. These are black dogs found in Devon that are alleged to hunt as a pack across Dartmoor and are led by the devil himself as a huntsman. This sounds quite familiar to the legend of the Wild Hunt, which yes, I will be covering at a later date. Interesting fact, I was going to do the Wild Hunt video today, but then I realised that I referenced this Black Dogs video, so I had to do this one first. The Wild Hunt soon, maybe next time, who knows. Anyway, while on their own there isn't much to the Whisthound legend, this also ties to the Wild Hunt by linking them to the legend of Richard Cabell. He was a squire and described as monstrously evil, to the point where people believed he'd even sold his soul to the devil. When he was buried, a pack of black dogs sat by his grave howling, and he rose from the dead on the anniversary of his death to hunt across the moors. Now, leading a hunt as a punishment for a sin is quite common when it comes to Wild Hunt legends, and beyond Cabell, the lead hunter has also been claimed to be Francis Drake, King Arthur, Odin, Cain, the Devil, or Herne the Hunter, amongst many others. It's also curious that this legend bears some similarity to the passage mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle that I discussed earlier. Did one inspire the other, perhaps? Either way, it's widely believed that this did inspire Sir Arthur Conan Doyle into writing The Hound of the Baskervilles. Also set on Dartmoor, Doyle was visiting friends in the area when he heard the story, and there have been allusions made to the similarities of Cabell's soul being trapped on an endless hunt and that of the Baskervilles being haunted by a black dog due to Hugo Baskerville's crimes. The next story is much more specific, and shout out to the Serpent's Pen David Castleton's blog for this story and for his excellent supply of gothic and folklore articles in general. Newgate Prison was a notorious jail during London's history, before being demolished at the turn of the 20th century and replaced by the Old Bailey. The stories that came from there were very consistent in their portrayals of prisoner abuse, squalid conditions and horrendous sanitation. The story goes that during Henry III's reign, a scholar was sent there having been accused of sorcery, and due to his weak stature and ongoing famine plaguing the country, he quickly became the victim of cannibalism from the other prisoners. After that event, the prisoners began to see a ghostly black dog wandering around the prison, and were convinced it was the scholar's soul back to seek revenge. Indeed, the dog did begin to hunt down and consume those who ate the scholar, even ones who had already escaped the prison in order to avoid such a fate. The story was told in a pamphlet released over 300 years later by a gent called Luke Hutton, a former prisoner of Newgate himself, who claims to have been told the story by a stranger in the aptly named Black Dog Public House. While the generally held belief is that Hutton told this story to highlight the continually poor conditions of the prison and the mistreatment of those within, stories of dog sightings in the area have continued. Even nowadays, where all that is left of that prison is a single wall bounding the courtyard of St Paul's Cathedral, reports still exist of a black dog being seen padding that wall and around the courtyard. Finally, we can't talk about black dog legends without talking about East Anglia's Black Shuck. This tale was told to the public by Abraham Fleming, who was in attendance at the Church of Bungay in Suffolk on the 4th of August 1577. Just after 9 AM, a thunderstorm arose, and with it the terrifying event that he recounted in a pamphlet he wrote called A Strange and Terrible Wonder. He recounts that the dog appeared along with flashes of fire and ran through the congregation. First it attacked 2 kneeling parishioners with bites to their necks, and then grabbed the neck of another man whose neck skin shriveled as if it were a piece of leather scorched in a hot fire. But he somehow managed to survive. The dog then made its way to the next nearest church in Blytheburg, where it killed 3 men and scorched the hand of a 4th. It also allegedly scratched at the door to get in, and the burned scratch marks remain on the door to this very day, though many people have implied these are just candle scores. The Black Shuck legend has long inspired local and wider culture. A weather vane in the marketplace in Bungay features the Shuck. It was the inspiration of the Darkness song of the same name, and can even be found as an optional fight in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So where do these black dog legends come from? Well, one straightforward answer is that they are actual dogs, or possibly other big animals like bears or wolves. Wandering the moors at night, alone, and coming across a rogue, once domesticated, now wild dog would be scary enough on its own, but fear and adrenaline can skew the facts when trying to remember something, and it's not unheard of for people to embellish a story when retelling it to their mates down the pub. Another theory is the stories are used to encourage certain types of behaviour. A demon dog running through a church might be a call to fight the devil by further committing yourself to Christ. Stories of young lads being set upon by spectral beasts walking through the woods at night might discourage local children from wandering off by themselves. Fables and allegories have long since existed as a way of gaining conformance from the masses, so maybe none of those stories hold any basis in reality. Similarly, many of the stories could be a way of explaining and justifying the usual psychological phenomenon we experience when afraid and somewhere creepy. Go out into the woods in the dark and you could be completely alone, but still you would get that fear of thinking you saw something moving from out the corner of your eye. Our minds play tricks on us and enhances our fears in situations like that, and you have to wonder which is scarier, that there is some ghost dog over there, or that your own brain is really trying its best to just freak you out. Of course, there's the supernatural theory that these are ghostly reincarnations of evil or tortured souls, or that there are hellhounds working on behalf of the devil himself. And conversely, that there are spiritual guardians of the lost and wayward, taking the form of mankind's oldest and faithful friend. Naturally, it's up to you whether you choose to believe in the legends of the black dogs or not, but as I always say, a world bereft of magic and mystery is a boring world to live in. Stay safe, stay sane, and have a good one.